All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. Welcome back to another episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast. This is episode 3 of a 4-part series where I am breaking down the scaffolding of my training cycle and the nutritional inputs that I typically target within that training cycle. So part 3 is an exciting one. It is the speed work development phase of my training. I like this one because this is probably the most variety that I likely will have in terms of the targets or the inputs from a training standpoint. It's a lot more polarizing than some of the other training I do because when you're doing speed work, you're starting to push up towards that faster end of the intensity spectrum, which means you got to balance that out. So there's a little bit more polarization. There's a little bit more variance from one day to the next. And it's just a fun break in the action that I typically have between my base building phase, which was the last episode, and my ultramarathon long run development phase, which usually ends the build up for a goal race that I'm doing when I'm targeting something similar to like a 100-mile distance ultramarathon. So the speed work development phase is fairly self-explanatory in the sense that it is going to be a pivot from the main focus for me being on just optimizing and preparing my base and foundation like I was in the base building phase of the training cycle to now my main focus or my targets during the week tend to be focused more on speed work. So things in the moderate to higher intensity side of things. And I'm looking to improve that piece of my fitness before ultimately peaking for the race itself. So I do have podcast episodes from last year that really focus on some of the specifics around speed work, like short intervals, long intervals, base work, long run development, things like that. So for those of you who are really interested in maybe a little bit more of a deep dive into some of that for your own personal efforts and things like that, I would encourage you to check those out if you have not, as this is going to be a little bit more of a like specific to what I'm doing or an example of what I'm doing specifically for the race I'm doing too versus being as universally usable. But some of that will be present here as I describe it, and there'll be some takeaways that you can use if you're looking to kind of, add a speed work development phase to your training and use that as a tool to improve your fitness. But in terms of how I look at it is I'm always looking at kind of like the order of specificity, meaning kind of the general trend line that I'm going to follow if I don't have more information to suggest I should do otherwise, is I'm going to be working from a framework of having that strong foundation, which is going to include the rest and recovery that you're going to get from the off season. So you're actually ready to go through the full training cycle again. Then the base work foundation, I mean, at the end of the day, we're doing endurance sports. So having a strong foundation in place and knowing it is at a spot where you are ready to add another adaptation to the training plan and lean into a speed work development phase, you want that to be there. But then from there on, from speed work to the next part of the phase of training, I want it to be in an order of least specific to the race intensity to most specific. So when we're talking about speed work development from that, a lot of times the goal race intensity will drive kind of what inputs I'm going to be doing first and then which ones I'm going to be doing second, or whatever any kind of blending that I maybe would do inside of that. Since the 100-mile distance is pretty far, it opens up what I think an opportunity to maybe a little more compartmentalized with this, meaning I might focus on one type of speed work intensity at once and then move on to another one versus kind of a more blended approach in this. Generally speaking, I think like the big mover here is addressing some speed work development. So whether you take this and think, okay, I'm going to get as specific as Zach does for some of his 100-mile training at times, or I'm going to just do a little bit more of a blended approach. Really, the big mover here is going to be exposing yourself to those moderate and high intensity sessions at an appropriate dosage so that you find yourself in a position where you've sort of moved that framework up. So when you get back to doing more intensities close to race day, when we're talking about ultramarathons anyway, intensity, you are just operating from a higher degree of efficiency, and essentially you're moving a little bit quicker at the same intensity that you were producing before when you were working on slower, lower intensity stuff prior to this. So there are like two main intensities that I like to work from. And the way I like to describe it is getting really comfortable with perceived effort and how these feel is by far the biggest first step. So I like to be as boring, I guess is maybe the way to say it, as I can in the early stages, just to make sure that I am like recalibrating the perceived effort for these. I look at speed work as something where you have to be careful about how much of it you do, how frequently you're putting it in the training, because it can be something that's a little less sustainable. And if you overdo it, you don't do yourself as many favors. So it's a lot of hard work to not get the benefit from. So you do want to make sure you're giving yourself breaks from it and you're properly dosing it. And sometimes that means you've been removed from some of it for a while. And then it's like you kind of have to recalibrate to some degree. Granted, I've been doing this for such a long time now in terms of doing some versions of like short intervals, long intervals, speed work of all kinds. I've mostly kind of cemented in my mind exactly how each of these intensities feel, and I can probably just tune them up without doing a whole lot of like field testing or race type stuff. But if I'm interested in what pace I'm moving at these intensities, that's very much kind of up for debate every time I enter this phase. And it can be highlighted. It can also highlight kind of where what I would like to call like my global fitness is at. So maybe I'm a little weaker at short intervals than I have been historically, and I need to focus a little bit more on those versus long intervals, or maybe it's the other way around. And sometimes doing like things like races that match the intensities that I'm going to be working on in the speed work development phase can be useful in kind of pinpointing that, or just doing some workouts that I've done previously or some field tests. So there are a couple of field tests I like to do that I can talk about a little bit that sometimes I'll do, other times I'll just jump in a race that can help me identify this. But really, I like to work on short intervals tied to like a VO2 max intensity, which I put as like something around a 12 to maybe 15 minute intensity, and then long intervals targeting like my lactate threshold, which would be something around like say 60 minutes in a race day setting for me. So during my speed work development phase, sometimes I'll take this as an opportunity to jump in some local races that are going to be kind of close to those time parameters. For example, one year here in Austin, there's this event called the Zilka Relays, where you actually have 4 people on a relay team and you each do approximately 2.5 miles. So one year I was in a speed work development phase and I was going to try to start working on some short intervals. So I was on the Zilka Relay team, and that 2.5 mile effort was about the time duration that I would need to pinpoint kind of how to structure those short intervals. So I used that event to kind of structure the start of the short interval session. You can do this with obviously with the long intervals too. It's just you're gonna want to, like for me, I'm gonna want this to be a little bit closer to say like a 60-minute effort on race day. If not, I'll use some historic heart rate data at times. Although I think heart rate data with anything in the moderate high intensity gets a little less usable because it's going to respond a little slower. So you can get yourself into trouble if you're using that as a guide when you're out there doing a workout. So I tend to kind of lean away from that as being a guide when I am out there doing these workouts. I'll sometimes use that data as like a post-run analysis tool where I'll look at just kind of how that heart rate graph looks in specific workouts compared to prior ones to compare that. Assuming I'm confident enough in the accuracy of the data that I collected for it, and kind of go from there. But those are going to be the two intensities that I focus on the most and how I structure a lot of my training. And then from there, if I feel like I want to get a little more creative with what I would call like some hybrid workouts where you're blending those intensities together in a specific workout, or if I'm at a point where I've sort of got the foundation laid of what I really wanted to do for the speed work development phase, but I want to do a little more speed work, but it's a little less precise in terms of what the target is, I can add a little more creativity and what I would consider like some fun kind of sharpening workouts in there at the end too. Because at the end of the day, it's like you can look at it through a couple different lenses. One is like you can get very specific with like what is the best way to structure, say, a VO2 max workout, which I tend to go towards like a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio and typically operate in say like a 2 to 4 minute duration standpoint, versus long intervals. Like you want more of like a 2-to-1 to work rest ratio. And then from there, like maybe I'm operating in like an 8 to maybe 12 minute time frame for those. It's like early on, as I'm like really monitoring my fitness progress and trying to like get myself to the point where that speed work development phase did what it needed to do in order to set me up for success during my long run, ultra long run specific phase of training. If I hit those targets confidently and early enough, and I want to get a little more creative and do things like some hybrid sessions or some, like one of my favorite workouts to do. And this isn't anything that would be like, this is what everyone should do. This is just personal interest of mine, are fast finishes where you'll go out for like, I'll go for like a base run, and maybe that base run is like, say, 90 minutes long, and I'll spend like the majority of that just kind of targeting that base intensity that I talked about during that last phase of training. But then if I'm feeling good at the end, I'll just speed up for like the last few miles or the last period of time during that long run, and kind of have like this like strong close. And the reason I think I like those workouts is, one, they give me the flexibility to sort of be like, all right, if I'm not feeling it today, if I get, say, 60 minutes into this 90-minute base run and I just know like, yeah, this is, I'm just not feeling like going faster than this today, I can listen to my body and respond to like what it's actually telling me. Or maybe I feel great. I'm like, I'm kind of really itching to do some speed work today. I'm ready for it. I make that call there, and I can do it. I can get that little bit of speed work development put into the back end of that run. Here are some discounts and promos for the HPO sponsors. Delta G Ketones has 20% off with BITTER20 promo code, and they also offer free consultations to help you assess how their product would best fit your lifestyles. Head to deltagketones.com. Element Electrolytes has a free sample pack with purchase and satisfaction guarantee, meaning if you don't like it, they will give you your money back, no questions asked, and you don't even have to return the box. Go to drinklmnt.com/HPO to get that free sample pack and try out all their flavors with your purchase. John G. Apparel has 10% off with promo code BITTER10. Check out their AFO shorts if you're in the market for a new pair of running or gym shorts. That's johng.com, JANJI.com. S-Fuels has a 15% site-wide discount. Go to sfuelsgolonger.com. All links, promos, and discounts can be found in the show notes, as well as every episode landing page. The risk with that is always, anytime I think you like don't prioritize the speed work kind of a little bit earlier on, is like you do have a risk of like, let's say I'm kind of on the fence about it and then I go for it and it ends up being kind of a bad workout, so to speak. I could lose some quality there. So none of these things are risk-free, I would say. So this is why I usually don't do a lot of these during kind of like the primary part of my speed work development phase, where I'm going to be more kind of inclined to just get like a general warm-up in, really focus on hitting, like, say, the long intervals at the quality I'm looking for, and doing as much as I can and making that a primary focus of my training week to make sure I optimize the quality for that. Other things I'll do sometimes, and this is maybe a little bit more specific for, like, say, the short intervals, if I've kind of gone through the paces of that session, those sessions where, maybe they're 2 to 4 minutes, or certainly a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio for the most part. And I want to kind of have that intensity embedded into a run, but I don't want it to be quite as specific, is I'll just do like some surges where I'm kind of like, I'm very familiar with the intensity. I'm not necessarily going to target a very specific time frame like I would for like say a 3-minute on, 3-minute off type interval session, but I'm just going to do a run and I'm going to embed like, a few surges in there that are going to definitely target that intensity, but they're just going to be a little less structured. And those would I'd put in kind of the fun category, the creative category, the side of things where we're getting beyond the actual kind of nuts and bolts on paper. This is like the perfect workout, so to speak. I'm usually not going to use those as much for like progress gauges as I will some of the more structured long and short intervals that I would typically do more of during this type of a training. The other thing I'll say too with like the fast finish, one of the reasons I actually like that too is it's sort of like, and this is definitely more of a mental, psychological value add versus a physiological one, is like there is this nature with, I think, longer ultra marathons where you sort of have this idea of like, all right, I'm gonna be in worse shape at the end of this race, just from the sheer amount of time you've been out there, regardless of how fast or slow you did the race. So like, I mean, I could go out and do 100 miles at a slow, like at a walk. I'm going to have more fatigue at the end of that than I do at the beginning, even at that low intensity. So it's just one of those things where like I think the intuitive thing to think of is like you're going to be more sore, you're going to be more tired, you're going to have a harder time focusing at the end of these events than you will at the beginning, regardless of how perfect your pacing strategy is. So to some degree, I think it just is a little bit helpful psychologically to feel like, all right, I'm moving along here at a decent clip and I can still push hard at the end of a workout when my mind would normally be starting to get to that point where like, hey, you're hitting the volume that you would normally be stopping at, or you're getting close to that, and you start getting that kind of that rhythm of feeling like you're done, still feeling like you have some more to give. I think kind of having that, some versions of that in my training plan can be helpful for me. So then when I'm on race day, I have points of reference to reflect back on that aren't too far away, where it's like, you know what? I know I can do this because I've showed myself time and time again in training that running fast at the end of workouts or at the end of runs is very much doable. So that's just maybe like an individual or kind of something you could consider as a value add if you're looking for kind of for a psychological reason for something like that. During this phase of training, this is where like the nutrition side of my inputs skew to the highest amount of carbohydrate that I'll likely do throughout my training cycle. The reason for that being is I'm going to be just spending more time in the moderate high intensities. So I'm trying to supplement those days with a little bit more of a fuel source that's just going to be faster acting. So I still would land in what I think most people probably consider a low carbohydrate way of eating with this. It's just higher carbohydrate relative to what I'm typically doing. So the way this usually kind of plays out on average is it'll be like 60 to 70% fat, around 15 to 20% protein, and then around 15 to 20% carbohydrate. So the one thing I usually add to this is if I look at kind of the averages for this kind of training phase, if I add up everything from start to finish, it'll land in those ranges most likely. But if you pick out an individual day, it's much more likely to fall outside of those average ranges than what you would see in the point of training where I'm doing like off-season, base building, what I'll talk about in the next episode of this series, the ultra long run, where there's a little bit more consistency in terms of the intensity that I'm focusing on. Like I said at the beginning of this one, the speed work development phase is polarizing in that I may have, say, like 2 days during the week where I'm doing moderate to high intensity work on the running side of things, and then also hitting the gym and doing some lower body sessions that tend to be a little higher intensity. And I may just want more carbohydrates on those days. But then then when I have a big day like that, it's kind of like do your hard days hard, your easy days easy. My easy days are likely going to be as easy as they get in terms of the training cycle. So I sort of have this framework where if I will support the hard days with a little more carbohydrate than my actual averages over the span of this phase is, and then maybe a little bit lower than those averages on those rest days, those easy days where I'm not putting out much intensity at all, I find that to work better for me. So when this will be, you'll notice this when I break down the sample day too, where like if I showed you a sample day of say like an easy recovery day during this phase versus a short interval day with a lower body session, those nutritional profiles will look quite different. But when you combine two of them, then they start to look a little bit more in this range that I just shared for my targets during this. Types of foods that will oftentimes end up on my grocery list, and I'll just remind everyone that especially if you haven't listened to the first two series of episodes, this isn't like an all-inclusive list. This isn't like an all or nothing. I stick to this like 100% of the time. These are just foods that have been on my grocery list to a pretty large degree over the 13 years that I've done a low carbohydrate diet. I just think that they're maybe useful for people who are looking into starting something like this or curious for one reason or the other. Like Zach talks about low carbohydrate stuff, like what is he actually eating? So you have kind of a little bit of an idea of like what the majority of the time are kind of finding their way into my refrigerator and then eventually onto my meals. So those would include coconut oil, olive oil, canola oil, sunflower oil, butter or ghee, lard or tallow, fatty cuts of beef, pork and lamb, full fat salad dressings, chicken and turkey, preferably with the skin, fatty fish like salmon, whole eggs, bacon, sausages, organ meats like liver, full fat cheeses like cheddar, brie, mozzarella, heavy cream, sour cream, full fat yogurts, kefir, milk, cream cheese, coconut milk, the unsweetened, like condensed stuff that you'd use for like a curry, almonds, macadamia nuts, pecans, walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds, leafy greens like spinach, kale, Swiss chard, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, zucchinis, cucumbers, asparagus, avocado, eggplant, bell peppers, berries like strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, potatoes of all kinds, beets, honey, apples, melons of all kinds, sourdough bread, and nutritional yeast and coffee are going to be some of the things that are showing up on my grocery list more often than not, on average, over the last 13 years, as I've sort of kind of gone through these low carbohydrate inputs for my training. In terms of like a sample day for this particular phase of training, I picked one out here where it was a 90-minute training session that was structured around some short intervals. So those would be kind of like that VO2 max target workout where I'm kind of pinning these short intervals to an intensity that I could do for say 12 to 15 minutes. And the way I had that one structured is 8 by 2 minutes. I had 2 minutes in between recovery. So that was like within that 90 minutes was a warm up. Then I jumped in, I did some strides and some like basic drills and things like that. Then I would do 8 by 2 minutes targeting that intensity with 2 minutes rest in between each of those, and then a cool down. This was actually a 2-a-day training from a running side of things, so that later that afternoon I went out and did just a real easy 30-minute recovery jog. Oftentimes my recovery runs during this phase of training are at their absolute slowest because I'm trying to recover. It's one of those things where I think you don't want to get hung up on the pace at which you do your recovery runs during this phase of training, because you are asking a lot of yourself from these like kind of shorter consolidated periods of time when you're doing the higher intensity and moderate intensity type stuff. This was actually a pretty big day of training. I also had a lower body strength session. It's not uncommon that I'll program a lower body strength day on the same day as I do short intervals, because that allows me to kind of like hit my lower body with that harder stuff on that day and then really lean into rest and recovery on, say, the following day. And for this particular training lower body day, I had a muscular endurance program on the schedule, which was just 6x10 forward lunges, 6x10 box steps, 6x10 jump squats, and 6x10 split squats. So that was the training. The nutrition input for that day were 8 large eggs, 1 ounce of butter, 1 cup of 2% milk, half a scoop of S-Fuels Chocolate Revival, which is a protein, S-Fuels Race Plus. I had 2 scoops of that, 1 cup of cabbage, 1 cup of riced cauliflower, 8 ounces of spinach, 3 ounces of almonds, 5 teaspoons of sunflower oil, 2 large sweet potatoes, 1 cup of 3.5% fat kefir, 4 ounces of 7327 ground beef, 2 rounded teaspoons of nutritional yeast, 1 cup of avocado mashed up, 3 teaspoons of honey, and coffee. And the totals for that came out to 3,468 calories, which were 148.8 grams of protein, which came out to 17%, 178.4 grams of carbohydrates, which came out to 27%, and 222.9 grams of fat, which came out to 56%. So that was a sample day that would highlight kind of the more carbohydrate heavy day of, like, say, a training week for this particular input for me on the way that I kind of program my nutrition. So if it were like a scenario like this, the next day I'd likely be doing some lower intensity, easy recovery runs and stuff like that, in which case I may like keep my carbohydrates a little bit lower than those average ranges that I would have had in the overall averages, in order to kind of average the whole thing out over time. All right, so that's the speed work development phase, and kind of how I like to structure it, how I like to have it set up in my training cycle, the nutritional inputs that are included within that. And that takes me to the third part of this series. So coming up next is the ultra long run development phase of my training. And if you're interested, check out the prior 2 episodes of the series, which are the base building phase and the off-season phase of my training cycle. As a way to thank the listeners for helping me grow this podcast over the years, I'm going to continue a raffle option for all of you to have a chance to win a free consultation with me. So it's a 30-minute consultation that I will raffle off once per month. All you have to do to enter is share the episodes that you enjoy on whatever platform you find most interesting. The only thing I ask you to do is, if it's a social media channel, make sure you tag me so I see it and can save that and enter you in the raffle. Or if it's somewhere else that you can't tag me at, take a screenshot and send that to me at hpopodcast@gmail.com. You can also enter the raffle by writing a show review on your favorite podcast listening platform. So if you do that, take the screenshot, send it to hpopodcast@gmail.com, and I will enter you in that monthly raffle. Also, I'm excited to announce that I launched a new group coaching option. So to go along with my personalized one-on-one coaching options and my pre-made plans that I have on my website at zachbitter.com, this year I'm starting a group of online endurance runners who want to work with me in a slightly different model. So this model is set up so that whether you're a beginner or advanced, you can join. Whether you're training for something like a 5K or something as far as a 200 plus miler, you are welcome, and this setup will help you reach your goals. The way I have it set up is, if you subscribe, you will have access to my full catalog of training plans, which range from beginner 5K all the way up to advanced 200 plus miles. Along with that plan that you're going to use, you will have access to a weekly group meeting where you can ask questions about training. You can ask about adjustments to the plan to make it more personalized to you. You can engage with the other group members if you want. We'll get you all set up and ready to really personalize that plan to make sure that you're heading in the right direction for your event. Also, you will have access to office hours, where if you have something you want to ask and you want to just hop in and ask a question, you'll be given access to that as well. I will be bringing in guest speakers who have a deep understanding of specific topics and things that we'll use to better your training and recovery process throughout the course of the year, as well as a private forum for all the members to engage with one another, share stories, share training tips, and just house a lot of the information that we'll go over on the daily and weekly basis as you're pursuing your race goals. So if you're interested in checking that out, just head to my website at zachbitter.com, go to the coaching tab. From there, you'll be directed to the team coaching option, and you can sign up for that and get onboarded to join the group. If you're interested in keeping up with what I'm up to, please give me a follow on some of my socials. Follow me on Instagram at ZachBitter, on X, Twitter at ZBitter, and check out the brand new HPO podcast handles, which are just at HPO Podcast on Instagram and X/Twitter. Of course, all this stuff can be found quite easily on my website, which is the main landing page for everything I do at zachbitter.com. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.